let's start with a little sutta, a discourse by the Buddha, where one time the Buddha's attendant, personal attendant, Venerable Ananda, came to the Buddha and said, so far as I can see, half of the spiritual path is good friendship, friendship with good people. And then the Buddha said, do not say that, Ananda. Do not say that, Ananda. It's not half the spiritual life that's good friendship, but it's the entire spiritual life that's good friendship. So I think the most important thing at the outset for entering upon the Buddhist life is to have spiritual friends, friends who are devoted to the same teaching, the same ideals, or even could be different facets of the same teaching, but friends who are together in the Dharma, and then to have opportunities to meet regularly. Like, does this whole group come together every Sunday?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good starting point. And then I would suggest that you have like a fixed, I think you probably have beaten me on this, but you have a fixed program of activities, including period of meditation, period of reciting some text together. It could be the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. Okay, a period of listening to a discourse or somebody reading from a book on Buddhism and then having some discussion. And then a period of bringing up, personal problems, personal challenges, and discussing them together. So this is a way for, on the one hand, you have like a direct connection with the Dharma, because you're meeting under the aegis of the Dharma, you're doing meditation, listening to some discourse or some text, and then also you're making connections with each other, personal connections with each other. And so this will be a strong support that will help to carry you through from day to day, from month to month, so that whenever you have, personal problems, difficulties, then you have fellow spiritual friends to discuss these problems and questions with. Then in terms of your day-to-day life, is there anybody here who doesn't have a busy schedule? Raise your hand. Okay, so everybody has a busy schedule. But I would say it's very important to, even with a pretty busy schedule, to block out a little time each day to have for your own personal cultivation. And you should really regard this as sacred time. Time with, you could put up these metal barricades around it, saying, worldly matters, keep out. This is sacred time and you're not allowed to trespass. Anybody who trespasses will be thrown into prison or fined $1,000. Okay, you block out a little period of time, even if it's just a half an hour in the morning. You have at your home a Buddha altar. You bow down, you recite the 3 refuges. Doesn't matter what language, whether you use Chinese, Pali, English, the 5 precepts, and then just sit quietly for the rest of that half-hour period, doing some kind of meditation, whichever kind you feel congenial to yourself. It could be mindfulness of breathing, could be loving kindness meditation, it could be recollection of the Buddha, whichever you feel most comfortable and convenient to yourself. Then at the end of the period, even just for a few minutes, you share the merits with others. You think, whatever merits I've acquired through this practice, I share this merit with all beings throughout the world. And then think of all other people in this world who are doing meritorious deeds. Rejoice in their merits. You can start with rejoicing in the merits of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the great disciples of the Buddha, and then all of your friends, whatever meritorious deeds they're doing, rejoice in those merits. It just takes, to do each of these exercises, sharing the merits, rejoicing in the merits, 1 minute each. And so you block out this half-hour period for paying homage to the Buddha, respects to the Buddha, taking the 3 refuges, reciting the 5 precepts, doing meditation, sharing merits, and rejoicing in merits. And this will be building up an inner core of spirituality, of Buddha spirituality within yourself. And this is not for the purpose of, confirming your identity, I'm a Buddhist, or for having something to boast about. But it's like building up a little nucleus of calmness and peace and spiritual conviction, commitment, right in the center of your life. So when you go out in your day-to-day life, you meet all sorts of, trouble, tensions, conflicts, demands on your time, demands on your patience. Then you can always sort of fall back within yourself on this nucleus or core of quietude and peace and mindfulness that you're building up within yourself, and apply that in your day-to-day life. So to give an example, often when we're going about doing things, other people will criticize us or blame us for doing something wrong, doing something awkwardly. So normally we tend to get upset or angry with them in return. Okay, but if you've dedicated your time to this, even just a little bit of time each day to this practice, when you meet these tense situations, you can just fall back, for example, to your breathing, and just be mindful of breathing before reacting, in and out, in and out. If anger is arising in your mind, you just notice, okay, there's anger, anger, anger. Then turn the anger around by transforming it, or transforming your mind into loving kindness towards the person who's criticizing you. May this person be well, may they be happy, or else they're criticizing me because they have a lot of trouble and conflict in their mind, so may this person be free from trouble and conflict. And so in this way, by building up this, each day, this little nucleus of calm within yourself, then you have, I don't like to use a simile, but I'll use it like a powerful weapon to carry with you in your day-to-day life, not to kill other people, but to kill the kilesas, or whanau, the defilements, whenever they arise in your activities, in your day-to-day activities. And then that will help you to be more peaceful, and also to create a more peaceful environment around you. So people might not know what you're practicing, but if they see that you are calm and steady, that you maintain patience and equanimity, people will start to develop some kind of admiration for you, some trust in you, some feeling of affinity with you, and they'll look to you for guidance and for help whenever there are tough problems that are involving them either personally or in a group. So I say, okay, just to summarize, like the important things, one is to have regular connection with spiritual friends, Buddhist friends, with whom you can meet regularly and share in activities and build up Dharma-based friendships. And the other is to have a personal practice that you develop each day and then carry from your inner shrine room out into your everyday life.
How did you start with Buddhism?
Okay, interesting question. Yeah, I first became interested in Buddhism when I was, I think, a junior in college. I went to Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York. And in those days, sometimes I would go into the college bookstore and just browse in the bookshops. And there were, I would see some books on Buddhism. And then when you go home, the books on Buddhism, the covers, maybe it's through my roots from past lives, I don't know. But they start growing on me till I think, I have to get these books on Buddhism. Okay, so then I started to read on Buddhism. over the next 2 years. Then my interest increased, but I had no real way to practice Buddhism because in those days, the United States was not like it is now. This was a period, say, 1965, 66. There might have been like a few temples here and there, but they were mostly like Asian temples in which nobody spoke English. Please find a seat. Tom, why don't you sit here and then, well, actually there's more. Okay. Okay, so when I went to graduate school, 1960, I entered the graduate school in 1966, but the second semester, a Buddhist monk from Vietnam came to study at the same graduate school, and he came to live in the same residence hall where I was living. And so gradually I became friends with him. Then I asked him about, questions about Buddhism, and especially about getting some instruction in Buddhist meditation. Then he gave me instruction and guided me in my initial practice. And then we wound up living together for 3 years I went to Claremont Graduate School, which is not so far from here. So then we wound up living 3 years in a little house in Claremont. Okay, then when he went back to Vietnam in 1970. When I came to live in Los Angeles, I was staying at a place called the International Buddhist Meditation Center, which had been set up by another Vietnamese monk who was a friend of my first teacher. And while I was there, then I met some Buddhist monks from Sri Lanka who were passing through Los Angeles. I became friendly with one of them. And when we went to the airport to see him off, he said to me, "Someday you should come to Sri Lanka and I could arrange for you to stay in a Buddhist monastery." So then about a year later, I decided I wanted to go to Sri Lanka to ordain as a monk. So I wrote to him, and then he connected me to an elder Sri Lankan monk who he said spoke English fluently and could give me ordination. So this was, say, 1972. So then I wrote to this elder Sri Lankan monk, and he wrote back to welcome me to come to Sri Lanka. In those days, we didn't have anything like email, so we had to, wait for a couple of weeks for a letter to go back and forth from U.S. to Sri Lanka. But I was quite happy to receive his letter. So then I arrived in Sri Lanka. What is today's date? October 28th?
Yes.
Would have been it was about October 30th, 1972. And then a few weeks later I was ordained as a novice, and then the next year I received the full ordination.
I have a question. You have this kind of deep roots in the Southern tradition, Sri Lankan tradition.
Yeah.
But obviously over the years you've developed some kind of affinity for Mahayana and maybe other Buddhist traditions. And a lot of masters will tend to say, well, my spiritual, or my tradition and my masters have a complete understanding and there's no need to study other traditions. So I wonder, what drove you to, or what drove that interest in this kind of multi-Buddhist
Okay,
tradition?
the first living Buddhist tradition that I connected was actually Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhism. Was my first Vietnamese teacher was a Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhist. But interestingly, what's been taking place at that time within Vietnamese Buddhism, and now I've noticed within Taiwanese Buddhism, is that there's an increasing interest in studying the Nikayas and the Agamas, or Ahangjing, because those texts form we call them the fountainhead of Buddhism. So my Vietnamese teacher, though he was from the Mahayana tradition, the text that he was reading the most and sort of focusing on for his doctoral program was in government or political science, which sounds a little bit odd. But you see, Vietnamese Buddhism was very much, at that time, very much involved in, call it a struggle to survive, because there was a lot of, the government that had been installed by the US was a Roman Catholic government, which were, the government leaders were very dogmatic Catholics, and they had tried to completely suppress and destroy Buddhism in Vietnam. And so that led to some of the early monks burning their bodies, because the Buddhists were forbidden to perform any of their religious services. Many Buddhist monks were being arrested and put in prison, and the Buddhists had no way to speak to the rest of the world. And so the way some monks who were not at all political, but just living very quiet, meditative lives, but they decided that they had to come up and let the world know what was being done to the Dharma. And so they immolated their own bodies. And then as a result of these developments, the Buddhists saw that in order to survive, they would have to know how to, use quotation marks, how to do politics. And so my teacher had come to the US to learn government and study political science, not because he wanted to become a politician, but in order to know how government works, in order that the Buddhists could protect their own interests within a country where they were threatened on the one side from Roman Catholics and on the other side from the communists. Anyway, so he had this interest in the early Buddhist teachings, and he encouraged me to learn those teachings. And so that eventually led me to Sri Lanka. But what I found interestingly when I went to Sri Lanka is that what we call Theravada Buddhism is not based purely and solely upon the early discourses of the Buddha. But when we get to the level of the commentaries and sub-commentaries, what I found is that there has been a strain of influence from Indian Mahayana Buddhism, which has been absorbed into that level of text. For example, in a text like the Visuddhimagga, Path of Purification, there's much more discussion of emptiness than one finds in the discourses of the Buddha. So this is apparently in some way responding perhaps to the development of the idea of emptiness in Mahayana Buddhism. And then in the commentaries, one finds the idea of the three vehicles to enlightenment: the vehicle of the Shravaka or disciple, the vehicle of the Pacceka Buddha or solitary Buddha, and then the idea of the Bodhisattva vehicle to enlightenment. Okay, so I found that there's a certain influence of Mahayana Buddhism that's been absorbed into the living Theravada tradition. And so I found many Theravada monks in Sri Lanka, or at least some of them study Indian Mahayana Buddhist works. It's almost part of the syllabus. And my ordination teacher, the famous scholar monk Balangoda Ananda Maitreya, he was completely fluent in Sanskrit, and he was able to read like all of the Mahayana sutras as well as the Vedantic texts in Sanskrit. He would go to India regularly and he could speak with the Brahmins fluently in Sanskrit. Okay, then I came back to the United States 2002, partly because my father was, at that time he was 86 years old. Now he's still alive at the age of 96. And partly because I was having some health problems in Sri Lanka, and I felt that being back in the US would be more conducive to my health. So I came back, and when I first came back in late May 2002, I was staying at the Sri Lankan temple in Queens, New York. But there was limited space there, so I had to find another place to stay over the next few weeks. Then I went to one interdenominational Buddhist function, and at that function there was an elderly Chinese monk named Venerable Renju. I don't know if you know him, he's been through California. I think he stayed here a few times actually. And he had a Chinese-Canadian translator, and they invited me on the way back to New York City to come and stop at their monastery, which was called Bodhi Monastery. And so I went with them and I saw Bodhi Monastery, and it was a beautiful place, which in the countryside of New Jersey with big spacious grounds. It was a converted Catholic high school, so it had a lot of facilities. And then since I needed a place to stay, they invited me to stay there for the summer retreat. And I said, I accepted the invitation, and I wound up staying there 4.5 years. And now Venerable Renjun was a disciple or a student of Master Yinshun. Do you know Master Yinshun? He's been like the foremost Chinese scholar monk of maybe certainly the last century. He died 2005 at the age of 100. And he had done a lot of scholarly work in both fields, both early Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. And some of the people at Bodhi Monastery, when I got there, I was surprised to find everybody is carrying around my translation of my co-translation of the middle-length discourses. And there was one Taiwanese scholar there who was doing comparative studies between the Pali Samyutta Nikaya and the Chinese Samyuttagama. This is the Tsa Ahanching. He was comparing them, and he had my translation of the Samyutta Nikaya. So I felt very much at home there. And then listening, every week I would listen to Venerable Renjun. He gave very beautiful discourses, and they were good translators who would translate them from Chinese into English. Sometimes he spoke with a heavy Jiangxi province. So he spoke with a heavy Jiangxi, he spoke Mandarin with a heavy Jiangxi province. So even the Chinese people who would come to listen to him speak, usually it would take them about a month to get used to his accent. Some of the people said that even though they speak Chinese, but they can't understand his Chinese discourse, but they listen for the English translation. But while I was there, then I managed to learn, to pick up, to read. First I took about a year of spoken Chinese, using a textbook, and I had a teacher. So I didn't do so well with spoken Chinese, because whenever I would speak a sentence or two, the Chinese person that I'm speaking with would think, ah, he knows Chinese, and then start speaking, and all I hear is a flow of Jiang, Ba, Fu, Xing, Yang, Yu. You know, I would need somebody to work with me very slowly so I could pick it up step by step. But then I turned to reading Chinese, and yeah, I managed to learn to read Chinese, the old Chinese used in the sutra translations, and to some extent, though I'm still struggling with it, modern Chinese, literary Chinese. Yeah, so coming back to your original question, I think it's maybe good in the initial stage, once one finds a form of Buddhism that one finds congenial, to focus on that and to study that intensively. But then I think it's good to broaden one's outlook, then to start reading and learning about other schools of Buddhism. Of course, if one just remains entirely within one tradition, one could develop a rather narrow point of view, so that one starts rating everything as being valid or invalid, true or false, based on that individual point of view, or that very specific point of view. Whereas if you widen your outlook, then you can see that there are points of view from other points of view from which things can be valid and invalid, true or false, useful and useless. But if at the beginning you start studying try to study at the same time many different schools of Buddhism, then you don't find any place in which to set down roots, and so you become a little bit sort of swept around from one to another without being able to get a grasp on any form of Buddhism. Yeah, I just want to say, and one thing that I appreciate very much now about contemporary Chinese Buddhism, the way I've encountered it, is that it has a very, very broad outlook on the Buddha's teachings. I found this with the followers of Master Yinshun. they used to, in traditional Mahayana Buddhism, they used to look at Theravada Buddhism and used to call it Hinayana, Xiaocheng. But now they just call it Nanchuan Fojiao, the southern tradition of Buddhism. And they're able to, especially somebody like Yinchen, could put himself into all of the classical forms of Buddhism and understand what is going on within those schools, what is their underlying perspective, point of view, how their practices conduce to the ultimate aim of Buddhism. So this is a strong point of contemporary Chinese Buddhism. It's, on the one hand, it has quite a broad, comprehensive outlook, and on the other hand, there's quite high quality, rigorous scholarship going on in the field of Chinese Buddhism now.
Do you have any goals, and if so, what are they, why, and how do you plan on accomplishing these?
Did you just finish taking a college admission exam? Okay. Do I have any goals? In terms of ultimate goals or immediate practical goals?
Well, ultimately, what do you plan on accomplishing within your lifetime?
In this lifetime? Pretty much my work in this lifetime has been translating Buddhist texts. That was the goal that wasn't actually the original goal that I set for myself when I became a monk. When I became a monk in Sri Lanka, I thought, okay, I'll study the Dharma for a couple of years, then go off and live in a cave someplace and meditate for 2 or 3 years. Then I'll get fully enlightened. Then after 5 years as a monk, then I'll come back to America and I'll become the first patriarch of American Buddhism. But it was a bit more difficult than that. So I saw that I have to go very slowly. And then one thing that I found, in order to be able to read the Buddhist texts, which had been passed down in the Pali language, I tried reading the English translations, and they were not so clear to me. So I decided the only way that I'm going to understand them is to learn the language in which they've been preserved. So I learned Pali language, and then just for my own sake, to make it clear to me, I started taking notes from the text by translating passages. Then I met an elder German monk who had been living in Sri Lanka for many years, and I showed him these passages and showed him some sentences that I had trouble with. I wanted him to check to see that I had gotten the meaning correctly. And he liked my translations. He said, wow, you're a very good translator. There's a particular sutta with its commentaries that I've always wanted to have translated, but I haven't had time to do it myself. Why don't you do it? And so this became my first translation project. And then after that, I've been, for the last, this started about 1977. What year are we?